Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for the bipartisan nature of this effort over the last few months. I think we all agree the goal here is that we do whatever we can for as long as we can to make sure Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. Not now, not in 10 years, not ever. And Dr. Allison, I couldn't agree more. I think it's an ongoing effort. There's no one document that's going to protect that. Mr. Tobey, you mentioned the vulnerabilities, and I agree with you that the two things that worry me is if the agreement stands as we understand it today, that in 10 years, as the President says, that the breakout time goes to 0 for Iran to become a nuclear weapon state. Let's assume for the moment that doesn't happen. So then we move to your second concern of the covert nature. And I think, Dr. Allison, that's the area that long-term is more concerning to me. I'm not too concerned about what they declare they're doing in their overt efforts. It's what they can do in their covert. Perdue is a good example, Natanz. I mean, the combination of our own inspection and our own intelligence failed us over the last 6, 7, 8, 10 years in that regard. I want to go, though, before I ask more about Perdue and intelligence, I want to ask about Libya and North Korea. Can both of you give us your experiences of one being a reasonable success in Libya, where we control weapons weapons development, and then in North Korea, where it was a catastrophic failure? Mr. Tobey, would you?
Sure. In Libya, I think the case was one of the important differences with what seems to be going on in Iran was an insistence that Libya make a strategic decision not to pursue nuclear weapons. That was why there was an insistence that there be a statement by Gaddafi. And it was part of the negotiations that we wanted evidence that this wasn't merely temporizing on their part, but a watershed event that represented a real change in Libyan policy. One of the things that disturbs me about the Iran agreement, if we get one, is that no one seems to believe that this would be a fundamental change in Iranian policy. It would delay some of their aspirations, but it wouldn't end them. With respect to North Korea, I think that was the case. The opposite was the case. We were never able to get any assurance from the North that they had halted their nuclear weapons aspirations. And in fact, the negotiator of the agreed framework, Ambassador Gallucci, said that they understood, or that the Clinton administration understood, even while it was still in office, that the North was cheating and pursuing a uranium path.
Dr. Allison?
So they're both very interesting cases, and both, I think, quite different from the Iran case, but worth looking at the lessons. In North Korea, one needs to notice structurally, to start with, how different North Korea is from almost anything else. That's the hardest case. Structurally, first, there's no credible military threat against North Korea. Secondly, North Korea has a great power guardian who won't let it get squeezed too much. And thirdly, North Korea has an autarkic economy that's almost separated from the world. Let me go through the pieces very quickly. So there's no credible military threat against North Korea. We have a treaty-bound alliance with South Korea, who is deterred by North Korea. So whenever it comes to a choice between yielding and threatening a war that would destroy Seoul, South Korea blinks. That's a problem. That's not the case with Iran. Actually, the neighbors are encouraging us to act, okay? Secondly, they have a great power guardian, China. So when one tries to squeeze them economically, China doesn't allow it to threaten the regime. That's not the case with Iran, unless Russia were to come to be a really, really bad actor, which is one reason to keep your eye on Russia. And thirdly, an autarkic economy. So I would say that situation is entirely different. In the case of Libya, which is also interestingly different, Libya was a pipsqueak country to start with. It was isolated. It's got like 6 million people, was just basically pumping oil. And you had in Gaddafi a thug that was running the regime. After the Bush administration toppled Saddam, he was terrified. And there was talk around town, including by some of my friends who said, hey, we can just do Libya on the way home. Okay? So it wasn't like a big operation. So being terrified by a credible military threat, he was moved to act. Okay? I would say if we could imagine an equivalent situation for Iran, that would be a big motivator. I think it's hard to imagine after we seem exhausted for a couple of wars that we've already had.
I'm sorry, Dr. Allison, you said that inspection verification challenge, that's part of our inspection regime. But as we talk about, you know, I'm not too worried about what they're telling us and what we see in inspection. What I'm really worried about is longer term, past this agreement, over the next decade or so, our ability to manage and watch and pick up through our intelligence efforts what they're doing covertly. I have two questions. One is, do you guys believe, both of you believe that we have a third option here after this, if this negotiation fails, besides war, that doubling down on sanctions could in fact help us long term keep Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state? And secondly, behind that, what's your experience and what's your confidence that our intelligence network today can help us maintain confidence that that we know what's going on covertly within Iran? Mr. Toby, quickly, I'm about out of time, sorry.
I do believe there's a third option. Of course, there are measures between capitulation and war. There are plenty of things that we could do. With respect to intelligence, Iran is a hard target, and we have had some intelligence successes, but I don't think we can bet all that would be bet on whether or not Iran gets a nuclear weapon on our intelligence successes.
I agree with Will. So on the intelligence piece, I think that we will never know for sure. We'll never know for sure. And it'll be very important, if there's an agreement reached, that we don't lose interest in Iran. So I think from the bigger perspective of the committee, making sure that the intelligence community keeps this as a top priority, assuming that this is a country that will get a nuclear weapon whenever it could. With respect to the sanctions, I think it would be good to double down on sanctions, though I can't imagine the political strategy that would keep the rest of the parties together for doing so, unless Iran should walk away from the table.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.